All right, so welcome back, everybody. We're starting chapter 5 of this Sefer Hilchos Tzedakah. So let's take a look. The last thing that we were talking about is my obligations as far as the amount that I'm supposed to tithe. And how much I'm obligated to give. We know that standard amount is 1/10, but a person can give up to 1/5, and then we saw certain exceptions where you can even give more than 1/5 on occasion. Sometimes it depends on the needs of the poor person, depending upon how many other people are available to support the individual. Okay, so let's look at Siman Hey. Nikoi hotzaos umasim meharivachim. Deducting expenses from the profits. So when we say that a person is supposed to tithe his profits, right, what is considered to be your profits? Let's say I have a business and my business has expenses and it has profits. If I just look at the profits and I don't look at the expenses, then that's my gross, it's not my net. Right? So it's a totally different number. And sometimes the difference between the gross and the net is a huge amount. So he starts off by saying, Tov im yachol sheyehena meharevachim ad sheyafresh mehem maser ksafim. He says, optimally, it's best to take off from your gross profits whenever you can. Ach im efshar ladas kama harevach. If it's not possible to know how much your profits are, yikba ta'arich mirosh la'asot cheshbon hama'aser kol chatzi shana bizman shenoach lo. The best thing to do is to set up a date every half year to calculate your profits, the company's profits, or how much you've brought in. Avalo ya'acher yoter mishana, and certainly it should not be more infrequently than a year. On an annual basis, a person should calculate his profits and tithe from those profits. Mutter linakot meharevachim et kol hahotzaot ha'achreichiot ha'kshurot la'avodato u'lemischaro. And it's certainly permitted to deduct from your profits all of your expenses that are necessary for the business, or for your work. V'lochein mutar linakot hotzaot niyar. Let's say if I'm running a business and I need to deduct expenses from my cost of doing business, that I for sure can deduct from my gross. Okay, so for example, the cost of office supplies, telephone, schar dira shel hamisrad, the rental and chashmal and the utilities for the office, ta'amula, advertising, nesiot, and travel. Those I'm all allowed to deduct from my gross as far as knowing how much profit I've made off of my business. Now, the implication of course over here is that if I don't make a profit off of my business, then I'm not obligated to tithe at all. Let's say I have to dip into my savings in order to be able to get by this year because my business is not doing well, so then I wouldn't have to tithe at all. And that seems reasonable. Remember, we said that tithing is different from the mitzvah of giving tzedakah. You exempt yourself from the mitzvah of tzedakah by just giving like one pruta a year. The only obligation of tithing is when you make profits. What about office expenditures? Let's say you need to buy new office furniture. Some say that you're only allowed to deduct what has been reduced from the value of the furniture because of use. So, for example, you wouldn't be, according to this opinion, you wouldn't be allowed to deduct the cost of the office furniture. You're only allowed to deduct what you lose from the wear and tear of the office furniture. Okay? ויש מי שפסק שיכול לנקות יותר מהפחת, אבל פחות מחצי עלות הדברים שקנה. And some say that you can deduct up to half of the cost of the furniture. I don't know where this comes from. I'm not sure why this should be so. There's an argument to be made that you could deduct all of the cost of the doing business, but this is a more stringent opinion. Hotzot Eshel. I'm not sure what that abbreviation is. I think maybe it refers to, let's see, what does Eshel refer to? Yeah. Let me see what that term means.
Could it be travel costs, Rabbi?
It could be travel costs, but I'm trying to figure out what that abbreviation is.
Achila shtia lina.
Very good. Achila shtia and lina. Very good, Shmuel. Excellent. Otzos achila shtia lina bishvil avoda. Are you in Israel now, Shmuel?
Yes, Rabbi. We're here.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, so Shmuel, since the last time we studied together, Shmuel has relocated, at least for now, in Israel. So it's good to have you on board. So hotzaot achila shtia lina, all travel expenses, including food, drink, and lodging that you need for your business, you're also allowed to deduct. But you'd have to also calculate, in other words, this whole halachic presentation is predicated on the fact that when you calculate your 10%, you're not allowed to calculate you're not allowed to deduct what you normally spend on your regular living expenses. There's the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, by the way, disagrees. The Kitzur says that you're allowed to look at how much money it costs for your basic living essentials, which are utilities, mortgage, food, and shelter, and all other basic essentials, and tuition, let's say, for your children. And after that, you look at how much money you've brought in, and you're allowed to take 10% off of that. However, so that being said, he is not taking that position. His position is, in this chapter, is that that counts as your income, that counts as the profit from your business. And when you take your 10%, you take 10% off of everything that you gross, I guess, after paying taxes and taking expenses from the business. But you can't just deduct expenses that are normal living expenses. And that's why he says as follows. He says, if you're incurring travel expenses for the business, meaning that this is not just regular maintenance of your car that you use for everyday living, but there's business expenses on the car for travel, business expenses for buying meals on the road while you're doing business, that you're allowed to deduct from your profits when calculating the 10%. However, and here he says, you have to take the differential between what the costs are for work travel minus what you would have spent for the same thing if you were staying home. So, and there are probably businesses that do that as well, I would guess. Let's say, in other words, they'll give you a certain allowance for meals. Yes, they'll give you a stipend for meals, but what they take into account is we may not be giving you, let's say, the full cost of what it would cost you to buy a full course meal, but we're giving you, let's say, $25 because we know that if you were home, it would have cost you $10 or $15 anyway. You'd have to have dinner anyway. So maybe you have to spend a little bit more. So we take into account that more that you have to spend. V'chein al derech zu mutar linakot et hotzaot harechev im haya koneh oto mishtamesh bo letzorcho haprati b'lav hachid. We also allow you to deduct the cost of the auto expenses, but only whatever you wouldn't have spent for personal use. So, for example, I need to rent a car because I'm going to a different city to do business. I can certainly deduct the cost of the car rental because I wouldn't have needed to rent a car if I wasn't traveling for business. But what about cost for gas? You'd have to calculate. If I was home and I was commuting to my office, I would have used $20 a week in gas anyway. So then I have to deduct that from what I'm deducting for the cost of doing business. Yesh poskim shemuter linakot hefsedei esek echad mirevachei esek acher b'shana echad, aval lo mishana echad lechaverta. So some poskim say that, let's say I have multiple business dealings. Let's say I have two companies. I have one company that sells widgets and the other company that sells food products. And my widget company is seeing profits, and my widget company is seeing profits, and my food company is seeing losses. So I'm allowed to aggregate the total profits versus losses of both companies together. But I can't do that from 1 year to the next. I can only do it in one time frame. He says, and that's true even if you are calculating based on a monthly income or every 6-month income. In other words, you'd calculate my profits versus my losses based on my multiple companies. And the way to calculate, the proper way to calculate, is starting with the 1st of Tishrei and going until the 1st of Tishrei of the next year. There is a psak that says that you're allowed to deduct the losses of one business from the profits of another business only within a time frame that you said you're going to calculate, as far as calculating how much you have to give. So if you calculate monthly, so you can only look at the profits versus losses of two different endeavors within that frame of a month, not within the frame of a whole year. Yeah.
Myself as an example. He's a lawyer, self-employed, let's say, and so he can very easily calculate his earnings, everything here, and make his calculation. I own a company with multiple people. I have to think ahead. I have to think of machinery I have to buy, things I have to buy. So taking that, am I supposed to calculate the same way as him? So, and I have multiple people working for me. So it's
Right.
it's like a corporation. So do I still have to, let's say at the end of the year is $100,000 profit, whatever. Do I still have to do that calculation for that, even though I'm going to need that money ahead to buy other sort of things? So I'm not taking that money personally. I'm just leaving in the company, and it's used for other things that are going to go forward with.
I mean, you're raising a good point. What if the profits need to be poured back into the company in order to increase the company's productivity, or in order to purchase more merchandise and things like that? That's not considered to be profits. I don't think so. I think that if whatever you're generating from the company that is put right back into the company is the cost of doing business, that's the cost of doing business. Right. So that's not considered to be, I don't think that's considered to be profit. I think profit is only what you end up being able to use for personal use.
Oh, okay.
I think so, because he
That's
said
a key point.
he said before, anything that is used for the cost of doing business is not considered to be profit. I'm not sure if you were in the room at that time, but he talked about all of the expenses that a company has to incur in order to maintain the business. That is not something that's called profits. Okay. Ein menakim min harivachim es hotzaos habayis. He says flat out that you don't deduct the home living expenses. Vim yesh lo banim, ein mashakas savnu lahalim b'simen zayin. But as far as expenses for your children, supporting your children, as we've seen, there is leniency because past a certain age, you're not obligated to support your children. That could be considered tzedakah, and you would be allowed to deduct that from what's considered to be your profits. Now, I do want to point out that this is a machlokas. The Kitzer Shulchan Aruch disagrees with this, and I'm actually going to try to bring this up for you. Let me just bring up, see if I can find it really quickly. Kitzer. Here, Kitzer Shulchan Aruch. Let's see. The top, let's look up topic. Here we go. Laws of tzitzis, mezuzah. Reading the Torah. Laws of charity. Okay. Okay. Just see if there's any duct. Here. How much charity should you give? Here. The first year, you should give 1/10 of the principal, and thereafter, you should give 1/10 of the profits you earn each year, after deducting your household expenses. Now, and then if you look at the footnote, others hold that household expenses should not be deducted. See Ahavas Chesed, authored by the Chafetz Chaim, end of chapter 18. And he says this is the medial way of giving charity. This is the average way of giving charity. The commandment is filled in its excellence when you give 1/5 of the first year from the principal, and every year after that, 1/5 of the profits. You should not give away more than 1/5 so that you will not become dependent on others, yada, yada, yada. But this item in the parentheses, after deducting your household expenses, is one of those really big items that is found in a very, very terse statement. And I felt that it was important for you to see this because even though it's not agreed to, you see, he says, chutz mitzorchei beso, you're allowed to deduct your household expenses. So what is considered household expenses? Utilities, clothing, mortgage, certainly taxes. That for sure, as we'll see, everyone agrees that you're allowed to deduct taxes from your before you tithe. But food bill, all the things that you need in order your living expenses. What about your annual vacation? That I don't think anyone would agree that you would be allowed to deduct because that's considered from your profits. That's something that's not a sorche bias. You don't need that for your household to maintain your house. But what about home repair? What about, let's say, if your roof, you need a new roof, for your house. All of those things, according to the Kitzer Shulchan Aruch, may be deducted from your profits when you're making a calculation about how much you have to tithe. So, well, this is the thing, is that, this sefer that we're learning from now is very machmir. And I just wanted you to be aware that it's machmir because he says unconditionally, ein menakim min haravachim es hotzaos habayis. I didn't share my screen on the for the other thing. Hold on a second. So I'm going to share.
Sorry. We're
So
talking discretionary expenses.
let me share my screen so that the guys in TV land can see this. Okay.
Rabbi, so we're talking discretionary expenses.
What does that mean, a discretionary expense?
Just like that.
What do you mean by a discretionary expense? Give me an
You have a
example.
choice. You have a choice to spend the money or not.
Well,
You're-
I mean, right. So anything that's a discretionary expense, you would have to count as far as your profits, your annual profits. But if it's not a discretionary expense, you need it to maintain your household. You need it for food, basic food and essentials. Now, there's a lot of gray there. What if you like to eat chicken every night of the week? Is that considered a discretionary expense? Or is that just the standard of living that you've become accustomed to? You know, someone could say, well, you know, if you ate a can of corn every night, or a can of beans every night, or peanut butter sandwiches every night, you'd save a lot of money. You should.
Okay, but on the reverse side, isn't it also that if you're giving stuff to somebody, you give them according to their standard of living?
That's as far as the mitzvah of tzedakah.
Right.
But what about calculating your own?
So I have a standard
profits?
of living too.
Right. So
I don't eat beef, but I eat chicken.
right. So if you paskin like the Kitzer, which says chutz mitzorchei beso, that you're allowed to deduct your basic living expenses before you tithe, so that makes a huge difference in how you calculate your miser, and how you calculate your 10%. This is a basic machlokas, and I'm glad I found it so quickly, because it's really important for you to see that there's really a very big difference in Psak Halacha on this particular matter. The Chafetz Chaim disagrees, and he says you're not allowed to deduct your basic living essentials or living expenses before you start calculating your 10%. So, okay, huge differential.
If we go backwards,
Well, he's quoting from the Birkei Yosef, which is an early commentary. Might be worthwhile to take a look into that and see where, and maybe we'll look at the Shevet Halevi, which is a more modern, contemporary psak halacha sefer, Rav Vosner. Okay. Kitzer is in, I think, 19th century. Yeah, want to know? Let's see. He lived before the Chafetz Chaim. Kitzer Shulchan Aruch was written by Rav Shlomo Gansfried in 1864. So he's living about a half a century before the Chafetz Chaim. Well, it's the same difference between the Mishnah Berurah and the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch is the foundational text, and then this is another author who comes many years later and condenses it and adds his own commentary. He was a Hungarian Rav. Really present day Ukraine. Anyway, it's widely accepted, but this is one of those controversial issues. So maybe I'll get you some more information. Maybe we'll take a look at Rav Vosner's tshuva. If I have some time this week, I'll pull it up, prepare it for you, and then we'll present it. Okay, let us go on. Absolutely. Well, the majority of poskim say that you should not deduct your basic living expenses. But if a person has a very tight budget and going like the Kitzer versus going like the other poskim is going to make a difference in whether or not he's able to live with a greater sense of comfort, or it's going to make a difference in whether he's able to consider investing in something for the future. I think that makes a huge difference. Yesh poskim shemutar lenakot meharevachim et kol hamaasim lelo hevdel bein hasugim. There are poskim who say that you get to deduct all of your tax expenses. In other words, without any differentiation, what kind of tax. You can deduct sales tax, you can deduct income tax, you can deduct what other kinds of tax are there? Property tax, all different, all those are not counted in your profits. So if after a year you've looked at all of the tax you've paid and it comes out to, let's say, $50,000 in taxes, so you obviously deduct that from your profits. V'yesh poskim sheyesh hevdel bein mas achnasa shehu sug shel masei revach shemutar lenakot meharevach v'nechshav kilo lo hirviach klal. He says, but no, there are poskim who say that there's a difference between income tax, which is basically what you're paying on any income that you make, levein sha'ar masim, between that and other taxes. So let's say, for example, sales tax is not something that you can deduct according to the second opinion. Kagon mas kaniya, arnona, property tax, bituach leumi, let's say, what is this? What would we call this? National insurance tax, I guess is what it would be called. The chedome, shenachshavim kamocha. These are considered to be obligatory payments that you have to make, just like paying. So paying property tax is no different from just paying your basic living expenses. And therefore you cannot deduct them from your profits. So there's a machlokes there as well. He quotes the Igros Moshe on this issue. Okay. So, well, that's true that, yes, on the one hand, tax is tax. But here, let me just see. Reish Mem Tes, Yoredeya Reish Mem Tes, CFA. Let's see if we can take a quick look at the Shulchan Aruch. Halacha, Yoredeya, let's see, Shulchan Aruch. Yoredeya, Reish Mem Tes, which is 249. So this is the halachos of tzedakah, and over here let's take a look and see the commentaries. No, he doesn't have the Birkei Yosef over here. Let me see. Let's take a look at all of the commentaries. All right, I'll get it for you when I have my CD on, and we'll go over this together. Okay. You know, it's interesting. Rav Gansfried was a businessman at an earlier part of his life, and that might have affected his. As it says, Gansfried was born in 1804 in Ungvar in the Ung county of the Kingdom of Hungary, present-day Ukraine. His father died when he was 8. Gansfried was considered to be a child prodigy, and Ungvar's chief rabbi and Rosh Hashiva, Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Heller, assumed legal guardianship. Heller was known as Herschela the Sharp-Witted for his piercing insights into the Talmud. Heller later moved to the city of Boniad, and Gansfried, then 15, followed him. He remained in Heller's yeshiva for almost a decade until his ordination and marriage. After his marriage, he worked briefly as a wine merchant. In 1830, he abandoned commerce and accepted the position of rabbi of Brezovich. In 1849, he returned to Ungvar as a dayan, a judge in the religious court. At that time, Ungvar's spiritual head, Rabbi Meir Ash, was active in the Orthodox camp in opposition to the Neologues, which I guess was part of the Haskalah in Hungary. Through serving with Ash, Gansfried realized that in order to remain committed to orthodoxy, the average Jew required an underpinning of a knowledge of practical halacha. It was to this end that Gansfried composed the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. This work became very popular and was frequently reprinted in Hebrew and Yiddish. This work often records more stringent positions. Isn't that interesting? He passed away in 1886. Okay. All right, we'll hold it here for today. I'll try to get you that information for tomorrow, okay? Okay. Have a great day, everybody.